Hi, everybody. This is Mr. Bob. I know it's kind of weird. This is a weird situation, and for some people, it might be just a little bit scary, but it'll be okay. And since we're not going to be able to get together for the next month or so, I thought I might do some reading for you like I've done in the classroom. So I'm going to pick a book and read maybe a chapter at a time, around 15 minutes or so, and do little readings that you can have access to. And your teacher will give you the link, and we'll just read together until such time as we can get together in person. Okay? All right. So the first book I've chosen is the book by C.S. Lewis. It's called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And perhaps you've seen the movie, The Chronicles of Narnia, either on TV or maybe you were able to see it in the theater. Well, anyway, books oftentimes are a little bit different from the movie. They have more time to tell a story, and so in this particular case, there may be a lot more details, and that's one of the reasons why I like to read the book instead of just looking at the movie or watching the movie, is because there's opportunities to find out more what the author wanted to tell you. C.S. Lewis is one of the great children's authors of our time. And he wrote this book during a very difficult time for the world as well, just like now. So I thought it was a good, appropriate book to start. So here is chapter 1 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Chapter 1, Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. The story is about something that happened to them when they went away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they do not come into the story much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet, and no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid." Splendid means a really good time. "That old chap will tell us to do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off of it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, and which always made him bad-tempered. "Do not go on talking like that." "Like what?" said Susan. "Anyway, it's time you were in bed." "Trying to talk like mother," said Edmund. "And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? Go to bed yourself." "Hadn't we all better go to bed?" said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here." A row is a kind of a British expression for disagreement. "No, there won't," said Peter. "I tell you, this is a sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes' walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "It's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see the mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There might be hawks." "Badgers," said Lucy. "Foxes?" said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out of the window you could see neither the mountains, nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in another. "Do stop grumbling, Ed," said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime we're pretty well off. There's the wireless and lots of books." The wireless was an old expression for a radio. This is even before TV. "Not for me," said Peter. "I'm going to explore the house." Everyone agreed to this, and that was how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seem to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only to spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected that they would, but soon they came into a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armor. And after that was a room all hung with green, with a harp in one corner, and then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, then a kind of little upstairs hall, and a door that led out onto a balcony, and then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books, most of them very old books, and some bigger than a Bible in a church. And shortly after, they looked into a room that was quite empty, except for a big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking glass in the door. A wardrobe is like a big closet, only it's not built into the wall. A wardrobe is like a big container, you might say, wooden container in which they used to put in their clothes because they didn't have hallway closets in these days. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. "Nothing there," said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, it would open quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. And here is a picture of the wardrobe in the book, in the room. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. Immediately, she stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it was very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. It might be hard to get out. Soon she went further and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers. But the woodwork never came. She could not feel it. "This must be a simply enormous wardrobe," thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. "I wonder if that is more mothball," she thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. "This is very queer," she said. Queer was an old expression for different or weird, and she went on a step or 2 further. Next moment, she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. "Why, it's just like branches of trees," exclaimed Lucy. Then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away, where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later, she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at nighttime, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened. She also felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it was a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow, and through the wood toward the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it and found that there was a lamppost. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamppost in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming towards her. Now, I'm going to take a pause for a second here and tell you that Mr. Bob and his wife Miss Dorinda, were able to go to where C.S. Lewis actually wrote this book, and were able to see the actual lamppost in which C.S. Lewis modeled the lamppost in this story. And someday I'll show you a picture of that lamppost. It's very interesting. It was only a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself. And he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upward he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's, and the hair on them was glossy black. And instead of feet, he had hoofs of a goat. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not know this at first because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I've said, held the umbrella. In the other arm he carried several brown parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked like he had just been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a faun. And when Lucy gave such a start of surprise, he dropped all of his parcels. Good gracious me, exclaimed the faun. And that's the end of chapter 1. In the next episode, we'll have chapter 2. Now, I hope this has been interesting. I thought to be able to see a familiar face. There's lots of stuff on YouTube, but you don't get to meet very many people who are on YouTube. So I thought this might be a good way to help continue some of the times we have together in Mrs. Vaught's class. Anyway, we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye. This is Mr. Bob.